Hello and welcome to the Lean on Agile show. I'm your host Shaheen. I have a dear friend of mine and a great Agile coach, Doc Norton. I got to know Doc Norton in keynote as a keynote speaker on Toronto Agile conference when he was talking about a very nice topic that I really enjoyed listening to. We might be talking about that as well. But before that. Thanks, Doc, for being on the show. And tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate it. Man, a little bit about myself. Well, I guess I've been in the software space for 35 plus years. Most of that as a developer or developer manager or director of or whatever, right? But mostly around engineering. And as you mentioned, got into coaching and did that for a number of years as a technical coach and agile coach, and then a leadership coach. Right now, I am full-time employed by Covered Insurance, which is a startup out of Denver, Colorado.
Mhm.
So I'm working there as their head of technology. And I've been, and I'll say, a aware agilist since 1999. That's when I read XP Explained,
Yeah.
basically the month that it came out. Prior to that, I was doing some of the Agile stuff, but didn't know about the
Yeah.
broader community. So,
Right.
yeah.
Agile averse. That's the first time that I'm hearing about that. Yeah. Thank you for adding that to my vocabulary. So you have a very wide uh, perspective of what you have done, like from a development to management to directorship. Now you talk about different types of coaching, leadership, technical, agile coaching. Is there any sweet spot that you like to be in more, or which one of these ones you liked through your career when you look back?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I like them all. I think I've been fortunate that like my career arc has allowed me to explore these different aspects of coaching. Um, I kind of have a pattern of I am a practitioner for a while, so I'm full time employed somewhere and or I own a company somewhere, and we're actively doing product and software type stuff. And then I typically, when that ends, I typically go back into coaching for a while. And so that's kind of
Mhm.
allowed me to, up my skills and then go coach about that, and then up my skills and then go coach about that.
Right.
Um, all of it, like the thing that really I have a passion for, and the thing that like really resonates with me um, is solving difficult problems,
Mhm.
and specifically solving them with software. Today, I think about it more as product than I do as strictly engineering. But if I have opportunities to coach kind of outside of that space, I either don't take it or I don't enjoy it if I do take it. Um,
Right.
so my wheelhouse is how do we make good products?
Right. Right. And I love how you use the analogy to do and then coach and do and coach. You are not focusing on one aspect or the other, and each of these two are helping you. Even when you're coaching, it's not only I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, it's not only what you have learned, but what you are getting from your client at that moment will be helping you in your journey moving forward. Um, I was having a very similar conversation with a good coach of mine, a good coach friend of mine, and he was asking me, "Do you always want to be a coach? Because if you are coaching all the time, you are not making decisions, you are not accomplishing something, you are helping others to do that, and that sense of accomplishment is not there. Yes, you're helping those people, you are through your coaching to get there, and you could enjoy that, but." That sense of accomplishment, because my background, like yourself, I'm a developer. I understand when that code goes to development, people using it, there's no bugging to that. Yes, that feeling
Right.
is much more different than okay, helping a team or helping a leadership to get through what they have. And I love the pattern that you mentioned there.
Yeah, I think, for me, something that I've realized probably much later in life is that part of it is actually for me. I'm not saying this is true for other folks, but for me, it's about accountability to some
Mhm,
extent. So as a coach, one of the things that I find is oftentimes the problems that you're helping a client face are not necessarily novel to you. And they might be. And when they are, then you're drawing on your prior experience, but you're also drawing on some theory. But no matter what happens there, they've got to make the decision, they've got to take the action, they've got to actually make that thing work. And so your accountability is actually quite low to a great extent, right?
right.
Um, and for me, there's an element of that is um, missing. Like
Mhm,
it's more fulfilling to me in some regard to actually do the thing.
right.
And so I find myself as a coach after a few years, I start to really hunger again for an opportunity to actually do these things. It might be there's stuff that I've learned,
Mhm,
but have not actually practiced very much
right.
that I feel awkward coaching others about. And so giving me the opportunity to actually practice that thing and to
Mhm,
really kind of, to learn it in a more tacit sense,
mhm.
I think then makes me a better coach the next round.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Were there any turning points or challenging points in your career that when you look back as a doer or as a coach at the same time that you can share with us?
Oh man. I will say there have been many. Um, I started my first consultancy when I was, I think, 22 years old.
Oh
Uh,
wow.
I was I was I was too confident uh, to realize how much I didn't know.
Mhm,
Uh, that I ran that company for 12 years. Lots of challenges there, lots of things that I can look back on and really recognize, like, wow, I really should have done that differently. And not just like, oh, I would have made a different decision. That's easy to do in hindsight, right? I mean, that's and by the way, a lot of times that's just resulting. You might have made a good decision but got a poor result.
right.
Those things can happen. But I think really recognizing, being able to look back and recognize the gaps. And that I think sent me on this journey of just kind of continuous learning, continuous practice. So
Mhm,
as young as 22, my first company, right?
mhm,
Um, accelerate through and another really turning point for me in the career was I didn't spend much time there, but the time I spent was amazing. I got an opportunity to work at ThoughtWorks,
mhm,
uh, and it was perhaps the first time in my career that I was just surrounded by people who had the same passion as
mhm,
me, who were far more skilled than I, um, and just the inspiration hanging out with them and the opportunity to learn. Like it took it. I'll say it took my game to another level,
mhm,
just because I had never before seen a collection of people, like that. You know, most organizations that you go into, there's a handful of them.
right.
And this, yeah, so that was amazing for me, and I feel like that really changed my career arc. I also had ended up having a really good opportunity there. um, I
Mhm,
ended up being stationed for most of my time with them in the Chicago office.
mhm,
Timing was very interesting. So I knew Corey Haynes from Cleveland. I was in the Chicago office. Corey Haynes was bringing together folks from Eighth Light, Optiva, and a few other consultancies
Mhm.
in a craftsmanship effort,
Right.
and I got to get exposure to that. I got to meet with those folks and hang with them, and I got to learn I got to meet the folks from Eighth Light and the folks from Optiva, all of whom became friends.
Yeah.
Uh, and then the craftsmanship movement started, like
Mhm.
right there, you know. Now, of course, when Robert Martin got involved, that name really helped to elevate it.
Right.
But you know, and so that just took my career to a
Right.
completely different path as well. So I've,
Right.
you know, I've had some really interesting moments throughout.
Right.
Yeah.
And Robert Martin is Bob Martin, or Uncle Bob as we know
Wow.
it
Yes.
in the
Yes.
Agile. Yeah. And for those of you who don't know, ThoughtWorks is a very successful consulting company that we heard lots of good stories about it.
Yeah, yeah. What so my ThoughtWorks today is really quite large. But when I was there, it was earlier days. And again, it was one of these opportunities, right? So I wasn't with them for a very long period of time, less than 2 years, but I just was really fortunate in that time. I ended up being stationed out of the Chicago office. So I lived in Ohio, but they kept me in Chicago. And at that time, so a couple of things were going on. One, Corey Haynes, who I had met in Cleveland, uh, was working with Optiva, Eighth Light, and some other consultancies, and was trying to get them to come together and like uh, do some apprenticeship programs and
Mhm.
actually like learn from each other, right? And that was the early stages of what became the craftsmanship movement. Now, of course, the craftsmanship movement, once Uncle Bob, Robert Martin, got involved, that kind of put a name behind it, and that, you
Right.
know, accelerated it. But you know, so I got to meet all of those folks and become friends with many of them, and ended up being a part of the whole, you know, that whole movement. And then just at ThoughtWorks itself, again, just so fortunate in the timing. Stationed out of Chicago, it happened that Chicago was where it originated, so that was headquarters.
Right.
Um, and so Martin Fowler, another Agile Manifesto author and a prolific writer and a great researcher, and really just a leader for our industry, I think. He spent time in Chicago. I got to meet him there and have good conversations with him. Dan North was with ThoughtWorks at that time. He came into Chicago. I got to know Dan through that. Paul Hammond,
Mhm.
you know, and so many others were there. It just was just an amazing opportunity.
Right.
And you know, I don't think I could have picked a better time.
Right. I guess that's one of the reasons to move to US if you are living in Canada, because I don't get you won't get that kind of opportunity in here. Um, but so you met these amazing people, like at least four agile signatories you mentioned. Like tell us any funny stories, any stories that's stuck with you with them, that you want to share with the audience.
So, well, all right. So I've got a few, but some of them are maybe not podcast appropriate. Um, you mentioned Agile Toronto.
Right.
Yeah. So the first time I spoke at Agile Toronto, um, Martin Fowler was the opening keynote.
Well,
And they did something unusual. I thought it was good, but atypical for a conference, and that was they had each of the speakers, aside from Fowler, because everyone knew who that was. They had each of us get up and say, "Why should you come to my session?"
okay.
And Fowler had just done a whole thing on quality and professionalism. He talked about technical debt. He talked about the technical debt quadrant. He talked about a number of different topics. My topic was the technical debt trap.
Mhm.
And so I got up and said, "You should come to my session because I am going to tell you why Martin Fowler is wrong." Um, and I'm telling you, one, Fowler was in the front row, and two, it was like standing room only. Um, And so at the time, I was just, I was really just starting to public speak. And one of the guys that I'd seen early on that someone that I admired was Uncle Bob. And Uncle Bob has a very kind of, he can have a very sort of, uh, sort of direct and oh,
Right.
and whatnot style. It might come off as judgmental for some folks. And I was mimicking that style.
Mm-hmm.
And I gave the talk and I thought it was great. Yay me. And Martin came up afterwards. Um, and I thought he was going to be upset that I said he was wrong. And he
Right.
wasn't at all. And he was like, you make some good points. I don't agree with you, but you make some good points. But I really need to tell you, uh, when you're on stage, it seems like bullshit. It's like, if you want to get good at this, you've got to be yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be anybody else but you. I've talked with you. I think I know who you are. That's not what you're doing right now.
Mm-hmm.
And that may have been the single best piece of presentation advice I've ever received.
Right.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, not very
Yeah.
technical,
Yeah.
but certainly a
Mm,
good moment
good.
for me.
Yeah, yeah. Good,
Yeah.
good feedback. Yeah, because if
Yeah.
someone that knows you, he
Yeah.
or she can give you good feedback. One of the this might be a side conversation, but very very quickly, one of me and one of my co-speakers, like we were talking about how to get feedback at the when you speak, like at conferences, and we came out to this conclusion that whatever kind of feedback that you would get, you won't 100% sure what the audience would think about it because you won't get all of the feedback. They might not have the right moment to give you the feedback, right? Or they might forget about it, or the medium that they ask them to provide the feedback might not be the right one. So it's very hard, but when you get a good feedback, you know about it. Like it either is constructive or positive, like you know about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a tendency if I've spoken at a conference and there's some kind of a feedback cycle, I have a tendency to just kind of like flip through anything that's positive.
Right.
I appreciate it, but
Right.
I'm looking for the people that
Or
are like, hey,
hey.
you didn't do this, you didn't cover that, you didn't think
Right.
about this, that this was wrong, this was whatever. And
Right.
sometimes what you get is someone who's like, I hold this opinion, you don't hold it, therefore I think you're wrong. Okay,
Right.
well, that's not really feedback.
Right.
But I look for the constructive, right? The
Right.
redirective. What could what did I miss?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
How, let me see if we can get a segue to what you have been working on, not lately, but a couple of years ago. So is the metrics, the escape velocity book that you wrote, how the better metrics for agile software is a feedback mechanism that you are suggesting for?
So I mean, like I have a Slack channel there, and
Right.
I've invited people to come in and to give feedback. There's not a lot of activity in the channel, although I'm not actively moving that forward.
Right. Right.
So I could probably do a better job of that. And I do get on occasion people will ping me with something that they'll say like, I
Right.
read this and I'm not sure about it or whatever. But I mean, I'd be open to it. When I
Mhm.
started writing the book, I put it on LeanPub.
Right.
And it was, early versions were free, and then it was, like $1 or something like that. And it really wasn't until it got to completed that I started charging more of a price for it. Now it's not, it's still available on LeanPub because they're pretty cool about that.
Right.
Um, but it's also available in, bookstores everywhere and
Right.
whatnot.
Right. But
Yeah.
the concept that you're bringing to the space is that velocity is not good. Let's not use it, and let's just move on to something else.
Yeah,
Uh,
it is. You're right. So I feel like there's a lot in the book, right? There's a lot
right,
about anti-patterns. There's a lot about misuse of metrics,
right,
et cetera. Um, but for me, velocity is an interesting metric.
mhm,
Uh, so it's mostly useless.
mhm,
For whom is it actually useful? Well, it's useful for teams that are stable, high performing teams.
Mhm.
Now, the thing is, how do you get there? Well, one of the ways that you get there is you would need to know things like what's our cycle time? What's the variability? You would need to know things about your code quality. You need to be looking at a cumulative flow diagram that tells you about the flow of work through your actual system.
Right.
There's a bunch of metrics that you would need to use to get to the point where you're a high performing team. And finally, velocity tells you something.
Mhm.
But all of the metrics that you use to get there are still valuable.
Right.
And velocity doesn't tell you anything more than what those metrics tell you.
Mm.
So basically, the moment that it's good for you, you realize you don't need it.
Right.
And I realize that it's widely used, widely adopted. But my experience, and I feel like the experience of many others, is that it's mostly misused,
Yeah.
sometimes abused, and is
Right.
actually not helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, my experience the same. You would see this mostly being abused, right? Because the mandate comes in that we need to increase velocity, like implicitly or explicitly. Because
Right.
why? Because we can measure velocity very easily. Like this tool that we are using, just giving us velocity, and the management wants to see you guys deliver more.
Yep.
Like not talking about code quality, not talking about from the user perspective, if it things that we put in their hands, are they actually using or not? We just want more things to get into production.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've seen many games played with the velocity. Now we are going to put everything that we do and give it the points so that we can include it in the velocity. So lots of other overheads now convert the points to each other. Like yeah. I can feel like I was going to ask what made you tell still going to ask because that was my assumption. But what was the decision making point that I need to write this book, right? I need because it was very well received, and it's easy read. People, at least myself, I understand it very easily and can get practical advices from it. So
Yeah.
what yeah.
It's funny. Uh, so I had written a talk uh, many years prior that was called "Velocity is not the goal."
Hmm.
And basically that talk kind of matured over the years as I was giving it and as it was being asked for again. Um, and it started to take on a structure, right? Um, but it was never something that I thought was like my primary focus. It just, yeah, this is important over here. And then I was very actively trying to write a book on uh, management and behaviors. And I kept getting writer's block. I just was really having a hard time getting through it. And I talked with a few different people, but it was Johanna Rothman
Hmm.
who said, "Look, a few things. One, um, you probably have more than one book in you, and this one's not ready to come out.
Okay.
So, two, stop thinking about what you're trying to write and just sit down every day and write. You've
Hmm.
got to get over this hump." And I was like, "Okay." And so that's what I did. And I just sat down every day and I just wrote. Um,
Hmm.
and then, a month later, I look back and I was like, I'm mostly writing about metrics.
Right.
And I'm mostly writing about velocity.
Right.
I guess this is the book I'm supposed to write. And so I leaned into the research I had done
Hmm.
for the talk. I did a bunch of other research. I leaned into my own experience and that of others that I knew. And out came that book. I didn't intend to write it.
Right. Amazing advice from Joanna.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had no idea that was the one I was supposed to write.
Right.
But it seems to have worked pretty well.
Right.
And I'm now back to writing that original book that I was attempting, but
Right.
I've really reshaped it now.
Okay. Is
And
it
and
still about management and behavior pattern?
yeah, yeah. So I've had a framework from a management perspective that has evolved over time.
Mhm.
But it's fairly I think it's fairly straightforward, but there's a lot behind it. So from a management leadership standpoint, what you need to be fostering is connection, excellence, safety, autonomy, diversity, and really in that order.
Mhm.
Right? So the first thing is creating connection, and that is not only connection between people in the organization, but connection to the mission, the vision, the actual goal, right?
Mhm.
And I'm not going to go through all of them, but excellence,
Right.
safety, autonomy, diversity. So they're in a deliberate order, and they're not in order of importance. Diversity is extremely important. But if you don't have some of these other things in place, if you don't have
Mhm.
safety in place, psychological safety in place, diversity is a lot harder to achieve.
Mhm.
Right. So anyway, that was the original book. Now, underneath that is a set of behaviors that should exist on a team. And what I've decided to do is to write that instead. I've decided to write about the behaviors that should exist on a team. And
Mhm.
that seems to be, so far, that's going swimmingly. I'm
Okay.
enjoying the process again. So,
Okay. Nice. Nice. So we are going to see at least one book coming out.
yep.
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
sounds
Yeah.
good. So one thing that I noticed that you haven't called yourself an agile expert or agile like the god in agile or anything like that. The mostly that you referred to was agile Everest from that moment that you worked with agile and
Yeah.
many years you worked in different capacities. When you look back and you look back at the word agile, what comes to your mind? What brings bring experiences that you want to share with our audience?
Yeah. So I think so Agile itself, it's like a lot of other terms in the industry. Over time, it changes. Yeah, so Dan North does this great talk. He on um, really kind of the evolution of societies, uh,
Hmm.
uh, clubs, religions, etc., and kind of talks about how they start, how they evolve, and how eventually, they really kind of are no longer what they were intended. And part of it is that when Agile started, it was a small community,
Hmm.
and it was really very values and principles based. Um, and they did a some of the members of that community did a pretty good job of codifying what those values and principles were, and to this day still are, right? But what tends to happen is in the beginning that attracts a certain type of person. But as that community grows and as that community starts to become known, people outside of that community are observing it, from the outside and basically getting a surface view. When you look at any of these communities from a surface view, what you see is practices,
Hmm.
right? If you look at any particular religion and you look at it from an outside view, what you see is practices.
Hmm.
You've got to actually study it to know the kind of the underpinnings, the thoughts, the beliefs, the values, right? And Agile went through this same thing
Hmm.
where people started to equate practices with agility until it became, if you were following these practices, you were agile, even though the real essence of it may have been completely absent.
Hmm.
And it was, I can't say what year it was, um, but I just kind of, in order to get a job, I would say I was an agile coach.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but other than that, I did not identify as agile anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Right.
did not, not that I didn't identify with the community. I was still active in it.
Right.
But I just felt like the word had lost its meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting. I mentioned the behaviors. I'll share with you what the behaviors are, because in it, to a great extent for me, um, this is sort of my distillation of uh, what are, I think is my way of looking at agility, right?
Mm-hmm.
So every team, I think, needs to exhibit these behaviors, and you're not going to be perfect at any of them. Uh, but the idea is that you should be always kind of improving each of them, and they are also in a deliberate order. The behaviors are: know the problem you're solving,
Mm-hmm.
right? So who's this for? What's the desired outcome? What's the objective that we're trying to actually accomplish? What's the value we're trying to deliver? But what's the real problem? And the absence of a feature is never a problem, right? A feature is a proposed solution. The next one is make the work visible. Not just what are you doing, but how are you doing it? Like, actually make your flow of work visible to everyone on the team. Make what you're working on visible to the community that you are serving. Next one is work together. Then create simple things in small steps. This is about emergence and learning as you go. Be meticulous about composition. Validate before, during, and after. That for me is validate the need, confirm the behavior, validate the value, right?
Mm-hmm.
Before, during,
And
after.
after.
Release ridiculously often. And a lot of people ask me, what is ridiculous? And my answer to that is always, I don't know, man. You tell me. If you are currently releasing once every 6 months, release once every 3. I know that sounds ridiculous, but you can do it.
Right.
If you're releasing every 3, try every 1. I know that sounds ridiculous, right? Ridiculous is relative to
Right.
where you are today. And of course it's asymptotic, right? Like when you're releasing multiple times a day, it's okay. Like,
Right.
you're good. But most people aren't doing that. And then the last one is automation over documentation. A
Right.
favor automation over documentation.
Right.
Um, and I think that encapsulated therein is both the underlying values and principles of agility, as well as the practices if you want them to be.
Mm-hmm. And each one of these ones that you were talking about, like you have gone through it like very fast, but just pick on one of them, like work together. That for itself, you can talk about days and go to conferences for like and or validation that you talk about before doing. I love that before doing after or one thing that you mentioned about was a
Create
small
some small steps.
create a small stuff. That for itself to work with a team, if they're not high performing, they're not working together, like it's going to be taking lots of time to get there.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that where I am now covered, right? And I'm in charge. My title is head of tech,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm in charge of both product and engineering,
Mm-hmm.
and I've pulled those two groups together into one. So it's product
Nice.
engineering. We actually refer to it as PEG. It's the product engineering group.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, within PEG, uh, every team is expected to identify one behavior that they're working on,
Mm-hmm.
the next month or so. What improvement do they want to see, and how are they going to measure that they're actually getting that improvement? And so my intention here is the behaviors are mandatory, but they are non-prescriptive.
Right.
So I want the teams to figure out for themselves, how do we best represent this behavior, and how do we continue to get better at this behavior?
Right.
And what that does for us is it fosters a little bit of divergence. It
Right.
allows teams to kind of take their own path and try stuff. Then, of course, we share across the teams. And
Right.
ideally, what we get back to is convergence. Hey, that seems to work for almost all of us. Why don't we make that a standard?
Right.
But it creates this, my intention is that it creates an environment where rather than saying, this is the way that we always do things,
Mhm.
right? We're
Right.
always trying to get a little bit better and learn
Better.
and
Yeah.
whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. The smallest steps toward improvement rather than a big bang.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
yeah.
And I don't want to assume that I know best.
Right.
Every context is different. Every team is different. Every situation is different. So let's create a structure that allows us to figure out for us
Right.
what's right, you know?
Nice. I love to work in an organization that product and engineering are working together, because some of the things that I typically see and dealt with is this um, being apart from each other, and you have to bring them together. So it's amazing that you already brought them together. Like give them this, like this is you, like you figure out what behavior. I don't assume that you are giving them to like these are your metrics that you need to provide, whatever you want to provide. You guys figure it out, how you're measuring it, how you're at the end of the day, if that behavior gets picked up and used, everyone knows that. Like yeah, amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. I do have some stuff that I've laid out that like these have to happen. Right. So for
Right.
example, you have to lead with test.
Hmm.
How you do that is still up to you. You want to do, TDD, you want to do BDD, you want to try something different. Okay, let's,
Right.
but you have to lead with test.
Right.
Uh, you do have to have metrics around the team.
Right.
And so we do have some, uh, you know, we do have some baseline quality metrics that every team has to have.
Right.
Um, but I also don't look at those and I don't compare across team.
Right. Right.
They're for the teams to understand how are they doing and to help
Right.
them recognize where might we improve.
Right.
They're not they're not they're not for me to
Yeah.
your your
Blames.
yeah your lead time is too
Right.
long. Shorten it. Like I
Right.
might say, hey, this lead time seems like it's a problem. Do you
Right.
guys think it's a problem? What could we do about it? You
Right.
know?
Right.
Yeah.
Amazing. Um, Doug, we are getting almost to the end of our conversation. A
Sure.
couple of things I want to ask before make sure to ask before ending it. Is there any resource, any books, any material, any video that you might have seen, or any conference, anything that comes to your mind through your whole 35 plus year career that change your. So one of them was, for example, working with great people that you told us about. Is there anything that you can share that more easily accessible for us rather than that?
Yeah. All right. So I will say that some of these. All right. So Steve McConnell's Code Complete,
Hmm.
was very influential for me. I don't think it's aged super well.
Hmm.
There's some advice in there that I would not use today, but
Right.
it was big for me. XP Explained was big for me.
Right.
Um, the patterns books were good, Gang of Four and that, but really, Joshua Kurievsky's refactoring to patterns
Hmm.
kind of like somehow brought that home for me. It made a real difference for me to be able to recognize that, like, wait, you don't decide up front what the pattern is. You recognize the pattern as it emerges in front of you,
Hmm.
and you can, and then you can like solidify into that, right? That was huge. I'm going to fast forward a little bit. So lately, it's been a lot more about product stuff for me than it has been about the engineering stuff.
Right.
Um, and I will say that I really have enjoyed Melissa Perry's Escape the Build Trap.
Hmm. Yeah.
That was a really good book. A lot of it I felt like I just was nodding my head the whole time, you
Hmm.
know. Um, and then very recently, I've kind of been revisiting work from Teresa Torres,
Mhm.
and I just think it's really good stuff. So what I like about Teresa's work, and she's got a couple of books out, but her blog is really good too. Uh, it's all very practical advice. Like
Mhm.
she's really talking about like how to do the thing, you
Right.
know. And so it's super helpful. And she's got some ideas that I don't know if they're original to her or not. It doesn't matter. She explains them super well, and so I think that's good stuff. There's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing those.
Yeah.
Um, was there anything that we wanted to talk about and it didn't come up that we want to touch base at the end of?
No, I don't. I mean, I don't think so. I didn't come into this with a high
Yeah.
expectation. Like we're going to talk about this specific thing. I was more like, yeah, I want to talk with my friend. Haven't seen him in a while. This sounds like a like it'll be a good time.
Yeah.
Um, and I've enjoyed the conversation, so I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Doc. If people want to get in touch with you, is there any medium that they can, or you prefer to share with them?
So I'm Doc on Dev everywhere. So
Mhm.
that is Doc on Development, but shortened Doc on
Right.
Dev. Really everywhere. You know, I'm still on whatever that thing's called these days. Used to be Twitter.
Right.
Now it's, you know, X or whatever. I'm
Right.
still there. Uh, I'm spending more time on Mastodon and Threads.
Mhm.
But really, you know, whatever platform you're on, I'm probably there as Doc on Dev,
Right.
and you know, I'd be glad to hear from folks. I'm
Right.
always glad to have a conversation.
Yeah. Thank you so much for spending the time with me, Doc, and I'm sure people that listen to the podcast will enjoy it as well. I hope you had a good time with us too.
It,
Yeah.
yeah, thank you so much for having me.